Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'm not a member of this committee, but I am the leader of a small European Parliament. Now, I don't want to talk about the procedure, that is your remit, but I would like to say something about the substance. It's 25 years now that I've been in this Parliament, and I was in the French Parliament before that. And I have to say that I'm a little bit worried by what I see as a drift here. Look at parliamentary immunity, for example. We protect through this freedom of expression of all MEPs, regardless of their political colours. I've defended Mr. Panella, for example, who's at the other end of the spectrum. Mr. Krivine, a communist, was in the US. He's been involved in violent exchanges with me in the past. He was not allowed into the US when we went there on a delegation trip, and I said that the whole delegation shouldn't go in that case. If we were talking to the American Congress, then they had no right to influence the composition of our delegation in the same way that we had no right to influence the composition of their delegation. But here we see a certain drift. First of all, the funding. I wasn't happy about the funding, but I wasn't the only one. When the Greens weren't in the European Parliament, they attacked the first draft on funding, and there was an ECJ ruling. It was the Greens versus the European Parliament, and the ECJ ruled initially that party funding for existing parties already in the Parliament gave them an advantage over those standing to get into the Parliament for the first time. Eventually we all came together with the funding that we have. Now, I've followed developments. I've watched patriots, people who are hostile to the EU work, but we all sat together saying that we could defend our own identities whilst at one and the same time being European. But Mr. Guerrero said something very interesting a moment ago. He said, let's not delude ourselves. This text is not going to lead to the prohibition of political parties or no funding for Eurosceptic parties. Mr. Guerrero has said that in monarchist parliaments there were Republicans and there were monarchists in republics. I mean, that goes for France. We have a very even under Napoleon III and the Second Empire, people were still allowed to express their views, and they had the same rights in the Parliament as the other side. But when you invoke European values, you're actually contesting that very principle. It's very clear that we have a different view to you on European values. I think that equality, sovereignty, and sovereignty of nations were invented by Europe. Others think that we need a federal Europe. We differ. Take family affairs. We have different views. I prefer the Christian tradition of the union of a man of a woman, giving life to children and raising those children. Others see equality as meaning marriage for any two people who wish to get together regardless of their gender. Now, the European Parliament's very goal is to allow discussions on European values. But what you're doing here is introducing a monitoring system which is an ideological monitoring system. What's extraordinary here is that minority rights are being judged in this draft by the majority, even in the texts as they currently stand. Recently, the Socialists, the Liberals and EPP and myself went to the Japanese Parliament on a delegation visit, and we talked about this issue with our Japanese counterparts, and they were gobsmacked by the idea that political parties would be funded or not on the basis of decisions taken by their opponents and on the grounds that they their parties weren't in line with European values. Now, I've spoken at length now, but let me just say that what we've got here is very restrictive. It's far more restrictive than the Hungarian constitution that we've been criticising. If this control, this monitoring, were put into force, and I don't know, but I've been told that the socialist group leader has initiated procedures to check the European values of groups opposing the socialists. Well, if that were to happen, and if members were then excluded despite being elected by the population at large, then I've got to warn you, and I'm not threatening you, but what it's going to do is simply aggravate hostility towards Europe. If you want to reinforce the European Union, for example, I'm talking to the EPP and the Socialists now, then you are going to do the exact opposite here. People will be indignant about this. I have to say that if this procedure were to lead to a halt to the modest funds that we in our group get, then we would certainly use that as part of our campaign manifesto, and people would be outraged by it. Yes, there's criminal abuses that we have to avoid, but there's national legislation. If there are racist crimes, then they'll be judged in the national courts, and they will then be ineligible for public office. But if somebody complies by the national laws and stands for election and gets the number of votes they need to be elected, are you really then going to turn this fully fledged MEP into some sort of second class MEP? That's going to be seen as an insult to the electorate.